Last year, one of the things that, by the way, did everybody sign into the sign-in sheet on the, anybody not sign in? The,
You don't have to do it right now or no.
No.
You can do it on the way out, but it's up to y'all.
They are exacting a price, which is in exchange for free space. They want the, which is our meeting space here. They want to be able to hound you with unsolicited emails or whatever it is.
Potential email from Capital Factory.
Potential email from Capital Factory. So, anyway, that having been said, so one of the things that Sandy did last year was at each of the meetups, she would basically sit there and listen to the kinds of questions that people were posing or questions that people would like to have answered. And a lot of the questions basically fell into general categories around how do I make my site faster, easier, better, more responsive, how do I deal with vendors and suppliers, what are my shipping options, things like that. Also, what are good ways to hook things into my WooCommerce site to expand capabilities, opening up other sales channels, dealing with sales tax, and so on. So one of the things that she wanted to do was to go through and I don't know. I see she had so many questions. So I don't know that I'm going to ask all of these, but we'll get started here because one of the things as we're trying to map out what 2020 is going to look like, one of the things we decided that we're going to do is we're going to revisit an old program that we had before, which is office hours. So 3 times this year, we'll ask people who have a particular issue with their site to submit their site and their problem, and we will fix it live here for the benefit of everybody to watch. And so whoever the lucky person is gets a better, faster, and hopefully less broken site. So this is no guarantee on that, but we'll do our best. So if you have interesting problems with your site, those will probably be more likely the things we'll challenge ourselves with. The other thing that so the other thing that we're going to be doing is focusing in general more on things like membership, learning management systems, the kinds of things that you would add on to just pure product sales as a forms of income stream. So I'd like to go over a few questions here. These are obviously questions that were raised by people in class and get a sense of whether these are still valid questions that anybody wants answered. So this is your chance to sort of set the direction for our year. So hopefully you're still interested. So streamlining e-commerce. So and the issue being time management or the amount of time spent working on keeping your WooCommerce site up, operational, and up to date. So is that still a question we'd like to answer? This is the participation part. So Hez can do one of these things. Circular if you're not sure. Sylvia, yes? We have one yes? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Suppliers. So how to work more closely with suppliers to offer sales and services. Yes, no,
Yes.
1 yes, 1 no, 2 yeses, 3 yeses, okay. Here's one. How to build effective customer loyalty programs. So
Yes.
that'd be a good one. Okay. So we apparently had a lot of people who like that one. So good. Lost my pen. All right. I'll just remember that.
Dog ear the page. Dog ear the corner.
Or yeah,
Do you have a little thing that you want to
sir. So, start that one. Great. So here's a question about the e-commerce API and connecting your site to Amazon, and what other services can the WooCommerce site connect to using the WooCommerce API? Hot topic? Okay, not a lot of heads moving on that one. All right. Well, see, I am happy to take things off the list, otherwise it's going to be a really long year. Research about sales trends. Yes, no,
That's interesting.
sorta. Okay, so I'll give it a 1 star.
Lean coffee style?
What's that?
Are we doing lean coffee style? Lean coffee? You know, familiar with lean coffee?
No.
Agile kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. How to use Facebook effectively to drive traffic.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right. That's
You know, it changes every 30 seconds.
well, it does, and they very effectively managed to rewrite the API every month or two without telling anybody, so everything like pretty much breaks. So we can give you enough information to keep you going for 2 months. Beyond that, there's no guarantees. Okay. Okay, so Instagram, same question. So seeing as how Facebook just bought Instagram, I think that we can probably solve.
Do you just want to bubble it up into social?
Do they even still allow you ATX access to Instagram?
Well, so one of the things that people are doing with Instagram is because you can only link back to your main domain name. So with a little bit of careful tagging and targeting, you can then from your site route them to an appropriate page. But there's a little bit of mechanics that go into that. So one of the things
I would like to vote for that.
you'd like to go over that?
Yeah.
All right. So, cool. Okay, so someone wrote here, sales across multiple channel discussions is confusing. So do I need to really go through the trouble of building and maintaining e-commerce and Facebook and or Shopify? So,
Yes.
Do we need a whole class about that?
yeah, that would probably be a class all by itself. So I'm gonna assume yes on that one.
Oh, of course.
Okay. Okay. In the legal category, that would probably actually be a good one for today's topic. A standard set of customer docs such as return policies, shipping choices, support tickets, legal disclaimers, privacy statements, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
Shipping policies.
Okay, so see, we actually pay attention to the questions you ask, which should excite you to the possibility of asking more questions here. So little did you know, we actually pay attention. Yeah. It's a good thing that Sandy's not here, otherwise she would deny that. It's like, you never listen to me. Oh.
Wow.
The,
I listen to Sandy.
Okay. I see other folks selling items from China and stuff that drop ships from warehouses. How exactly does that work? So that would be like Alibaba, AliExpress, something like that, which currently is in a slight state of limbo due to a plague outbreak.
Yes.
So we'll delay that talk for a little bit.
Yeah, that 2 to 4
Wait, you're gonna
days
ship
is
from
more
China
like
right now?
4 to 8.
You can ship from China.
You don't order from China?
There's a 14-day incubation period on the coronavirus. Large parts of the country are locked off, so it has an impact.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. does, but they also have to keep the ship crews in quarantine.
Yeah.
So yeah, so as long as your customers don't mind getting their product 6 months late, it's fine.
You know you're in trouble when they tell you they shipped it last mile shipping. It really is the last mile.
Wow.
If they hand
The,
you it across the desert.
It's only the Wuhan province, the Wuhan city, right, and the province that are
It's
sensitive.
affecting the whole country.
It's spreading around pretty.
It's spreading around, actually, there's confirmed cases in Taiwan now.
Right.
And,
As well as, I think Texas, is Arizona, I know that.
so it's, yeah, four confirmed cases in the States now, so.
I think it was 5.
Okay, I'm not keeping up with it, I just, so, anybody here have a brick and mortar store? No? Physical store? No, okay. Cause somebody last year had a physical store and wanted to know how to add e-commerce to it without losing, sales traffic. So somebody wanted to know about what do I have to do, to sell internationally? So anybody want to expand their business overseas? So we have 1 yes, 2 yeses, 3 yeses, okay? Question, anybody want to do business to business sales? So, yes, okay. And, so on the question of expanding e-commerce into a full-blown enterprise system where you have your ERP, CRMs, payment processing, logistics, statistics, other things like that. Anything of interest there? Sort of, okay, couple yeses.
So WooCommerce to warehouse?
Well, I mean, typically with CRM, that's your full-blown customer management system. So if you're thinking about, say, replacing Salesforce as your primary tool,
Or just integrating.
or just integrate, yeah, that sort of thing. So of course, I go back to Stack Overflow did their annual programmer survey of what are the tools that you hate the most. Salesforce was number 1, WordPress was number 3. So I'm not sure what to take away from that. But as a result, so I hesitate to steer anybody towards Salesforce. It's also not cheap. But
And the word enterprise was in that topic, so.
well, enterprise. Well. This is true. Would anybody like to play enterprise without necessarily being? All right. Well, I'll put a question mark next to that one. The multilingual. So interest in doing so options for doing multilingual. Okay. We seem to have a lot of interest there. And okay. Anybody want to run membership sites? Okay. Bunch of folks learning management. So offering some kind of courses, training, anything like that. Okay, a couple folks. All right. Now this is one that has come up a lot. I'll see if this is still of interest. So a lot of sites started out using Classic Editor, and during the first ramp up of Gutenberg, a lot of folks turned on Classic Editor again, and things like ramp so that they could selectively turn on or off Gutenberg on other parts of your site. Then the question, of course, comes of, all right, after 2 years of dodging that bullet, how do I transition back to, and I'll say that, by the way, if you're doing new posts, Gutenberg works really well. If you're switching old posts to Gutenberg, it can get messy. So,
Is HTML.
Yes, one HTML block, yeah.
Copy paste.
Copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, yeah, yeah. But but there are some problems that go along with it. It's not just a simple go in and make a couple word corrections like you would normally do. Now you're gonna invest some time, so, actually, I'm gonna vote for that one because, we encounter that with our customers a lot.
Got a question?
Sure,
Oh, yeah.
what's it? Yeah,
Sorry.
oh no, jump right
Does
in.
anyone know, like, if you created custom buttons for the old WYSIWYG, is there a way to do that in Gutenberg?
Depends on how you created the custom buttons.
I would need to look through the code, but basically, like, it generates short code. It's like to insert certain types of images or whatever. And I just,
So-
like, when I turn that,
Mhm.
when I go into Gutenberg, it's obviously not there, so.
Well, if you use a short code, then it's easy because there's a short code block.
I think you're talking about tiny MCE buttons.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ah.
that's gonna have to get rewritten, because the tiny MCE's gone, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
They switched from tiny MCE to, I can't remember the library they use now for the formatting buttons on the blocks.
Okay.
So
See,
it's just
yeah.
means, I mean, the base that was on just doesn't exist anymore, so.
Mhm.
Okay.
You know what library they switched to?
I can't remember,
Modern Tiny MCE.
really.
You're kidding, right?
It is faster.
I mean,
Yeah.
segments of it, but
Mm.
it's still loosely based on Tiny MCE. They just updated a whole bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
Cherry picked it.
Woohoo!
Yeah, they couldn't just update Tiny MCE in WordPress. They had to go build a whole new editor.
And give it the same name. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, all right, well. Okay, couple more.
We made it.
Lots of luminaries in this one today.
So there's a question about talking about site navigation and making paths to purchase easier. So, I see a couple of heads shaking there, all right?
I wanna sell more things.
You wanna sell it, yeah, so, in common vernacular, essentially, reducing friction.
Make it easy for people to give you money.
Money, yeah. Yeah, there's for those people who ever watched, Futurama, there's a Fry, it's like,
Shut up.
let me give you my money! So, who would've guessed it'd be so difficult? And the funny thing is, I mean, we've come across sites like that, so,
All the time.
all right, and, okay. Some folks want more courses on drop shipping, so, I think we've kinda talked about that. Okay. Head-to-head on Shopify versus BigCommerce versus WooCommerce. Would that be an interest, okay.
Good.
So,
We'll go SmackDown style.
SmackDown, there you go, so we'll get Topher in here and,
There you go. He's counting.
All right, and that is it. So that is all the questions we had on the list. So your timing was worked well.
Very cool.
You have no idea what we just promised you were gonna do this.
Its promise is gonna be done, did not say it was by this guy.
Thanks, sir.
Oh, go back there. It's fine.
Oh, that's your daughter.
It's okay.
I have a question.
Okay, so the student in the front row, yes.
Yeah, how do I get on the guest one again? Capital Factory guest, right? That's what-
No, you shouldn't be on Capital Factory Cast, you should be on Capital Factory, members.
Members.
Sorry.
I'm officially the worst student today.
Turn in your phone.
Come on, hand it over.
This signing off.
I've heard that story too.
Okay, mister, just to make up for that, you're gonna have to get up here.
Sorry about that. What's the password for Capital Gas or Capital Factory members? It's somewhere. It's up here somewhere. I'm
It's
sure.
somewhere, standby.
Alright. Sorry everybody for being late. And sorry I sound like a 13-year-old boy.
speaking a little 12-year-old is fun.
Yeah. Actually, I almost have a 12-year-old. Am I crazy? Alright, so I gotta figure out how to get on the internets here for a minute. You guys went through the survey questions, right? That was the stuff you was going through? Alright, cool. So welcome to, what is this class of guys?
Is hack
E-commerce?
taxes, the password is hack taxes?
Hack?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Taxes? Oh, Texas.
Yeah, taxes.
That makes more sense than Texas. At least here. It's doing something. Yep. Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Oh, you got it?
Yep. you
All
got
right.
it. All right. Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
It's a good thing you were late, because I've got to run, but the list of topics you went through was very inspiring.
Oh, good.
I'll be back.
So,
And what room is this? Anton?
Antoine, yeah.
Anton.
Budget 93. There we are.
Cool. First time using this computer on this here screen. So all new stuff. All right. Before we get started, hello, my name is Toyin. This is a discussion, or this series we do in this room, just to make sure you're in the right place. It's primarily on e-commerce, or let me be even more general than that, taking people from strangers over the internet. Right, so it's mostly e-commerce, which is what we've done historically, primarily WooCommerce. The idea for this year is we're gonna delve into other areas that maybe are using WooCommerce, and maybe some easy digital downloads, if you know what that is. Maybe membership sites, maybe knowledge bases or learning management systems. So if you guys know LearnPress or LearnDash or MemberPress or those kind of things, as you can see, most of these are WordPress focused. For the e-com specific stuff, a lot of it will be WordPress, but a lot of it is still general, regardless of whether you're using WooCommerce or Shopify or BigCommerce or Magento and the like. I'm seeing some new faces. I feel I should introduce myself more. I'm primarily a Magento developer, based here in Austin. I've been here almost 12 years. If it is written in PHP, I've worked in it, and I've delved in a bunch of other languages as well, but my main focus has been e-commerce. So, before we get any further, how many people here are developers? And by developers, I mean you type PHP or some programming language on a regular basis. Okay. How many people are, let's say, Implementer Plus, which is you can copy and paste PHP in the right places and drop it in if you read the instructions, but you don't. No, you can't put your hand up, Nick. I'm sorry. Okay, so you can dabble a little bit, maybe some HTML, CSS, JavaScript instead of PHP, that kind of thing. How many people run stores or admin stores? Okay, is anybody in something that is, besides you, Marcy, something that is not WooCommerce? That's Shopify, BigCommerce, Magento. What is it? What's your?
Shopify as well as WooCommerce.
Okay, got it. All right, cool. None of that has any bearing for today. It's just for me to get a sense of what people are doing. All right, so let's get started. Wow. And if you can't hear me, please just interrupt me, because I know my voice is not the greatest at the moment. Not that it was the greatest before, but it's worse than normal. How do I do this on here? Slideshow?
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So one of the questions people asked in the in the survey that Sandy sent out end of last year, was people are asking, what is all of this GDPR, CCPA, XYZ, not FBI stuff, right? And so some of these things are at least worth knowing a little bit about. For most of you right now, it's not going to matter because you're not making enough money or you're not doing enough volume for these rules to apply to you, right? But I'm sort of gonna talk about a hodgepodge of things, primarily about privacy, but there's a little bit about taxes, a little bit about security, stuff like that. So feel free to interrupt when you have questions. All right, so again, my name is Toyin. These slides will be available at some point in the near future if you want to use them. All right, so let's talk about
30 minutes after you give them to me.
Okay, so what he said, so tomorrow, hopefully. So compliance categories, we're talking about privacy, security, revenue, and accessibility. So that means make sure that people's info doesn't just get passed on to other people, especially personally identifiable information. If somebody has your name, your address, even if they don't have your zip code or your social security number, somebody with rudimentary talents can construct you alternative lives and spend your money or generate new ways to spend money for you. Security is if the first one with just getting personally identifiable information is not very hard now. If you have somebody's credit card or social security number, it gets stupidly easy. So the first one is, we don't want to leave people's easy data around, and we don't want to leave essentially money lying around, and how to prevent those things. Then revenue is, people are making money on the internet. Governments want to get their cut, right? One of the blessings of the internet being federation or an interstate commerce is that everybody has been arguing about how they're going to get their cut, and so for a long time, everybody decided the fairest thing to do was nobody get a cut, because at the time nobody wanted to give all the money to California, since that's where almost all the startups, at this point, or Washington, since that's where Amazon is. So everybody had to come up with rules for how they're going to be collecting money. Most of that is being sorted out. Most of that's been sorted out last couple of years in the States and still being sorted out a little bit. So I'll talk about that just a smidge. And then accessibility. People need to get on the internet, whether they can see, hear, use their fingers, have fine motor control. How do you go about doing that? How do you make it so that the internet, especially when you're talking municipalities, especially when you're talking big businesses, are available to people that are not standard, if you will, right? And so if there's any kind of difference between you and, maybe you have carpal tunnel syndrome, maybe you can't see color, maybe you can't see, maybe you can't hear. Those are things that people, when we're designing sites, need to keep track of. So how do we make it so that, the internet is a boon, not just for, 6 million people, but for all 7 point whatever million people, right? When they can afford to get on the internet. All right, so I'm going to talk in the privacy arena just by a handful of things here. I'm going to, I will give you a quick highlight of what each one of them are, at least the things that are of note. Most of them don't really matter to you because unless you're making north of something like $10 million in revenue, you don't need to worry about most of them. And if you're doing e-com, there are a couple you probably also don't need to worry about. Yes, sir?
I heard GDPR applies to everyone.
I'll go into that. It does not apply to everyone. It applies to people that primarily work in Europe or are making money in Europe. And I'll give you what their definitions are. Right? So each one of these has a handful of things that make them special. You can go up and look up the specifics. I didn't go into a ton of specifics here, but I'll give you the broad strokes. You'll see there's a recurring pattern for most of these privacy things. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. All right, so there are 6 of these. One is for children, 2 are for California, 1 is for the EU, 1 is for health records, and 1 is for our northern friends in Canada. So I will talk about them each a little bit here. All right, COPA is Children's Online Privacy, it's supposed to be Privacy and Protection Act or something, but it's called privacy rule. It's a federal U.S. Rule. This has been out for a while. This is why when you see a site, I don't know if you ever go to a site like Neopets or Barbie's website, I don't know, Intel.com maybe, I don't know. This is why you cannot give information if you are under 13. This is why we don't have ads on YouTube targeted for children, is because this rule is in place. So the idea is if you're under 13, you don't know enough not to do something stupid. We don't want to incept you or brainwash you with, I don't know, something on the internet that's different than how we brainwash you on television. And so you don't want to entice kids to give you their information before they know enough to know not to give you their information. And so that's what COPA is about. Now what it's doing is it's looking for sites specifically targeting children under 13. So if you are making a site that's about Fortnite, or you're making a site about slime, if anybody knows what these topics are, these are sites that it is reasonable that under 13-year-olds are a high high percentage of your traffic. A site like YouTube doesn't technically have to worry about it because YouTube serves everybody, but the volume that they have for under 13-year-olds is so large they need to keep track of this stuff as well. Right? So broad strokes are, if you know this person is under 13, you don't track their data. If you want to ask them anything, they need parental permission, and the parent puts in that information, not the child. How do you verify that as a parent? That is a good question. You pretty much can't. The only way on the internet you can verify somebody is not a child is to ask them for a credit card. And so you oftentimes will see lots of free services out there that are for kids, but if you want to do anything meaningful, you want to make it fancy, you want to get something in the mail, parent has to pay, or at least parent has to put in their credit card, so we verify that this person is who we think it is, and we have permission from a parent to do so. Does that make sense? All right, cool.
So Toy, I just want to add to that there was a ruling that if pictures, the ad pictures that you have posted have children in them, it could be construed as marketing to children.
Right. So there's a game called Robot Turtles. It's a game I really like. It's a board game for kids. So they walked a very thin line around this COPA rule. In their advertising, they did use kids for advertising, but they did not advertise it anywhere kids go. So they advertised in Wired, they advertised on Kickstarter, I think it was a Kickstarter project. They advertised in like 2,600 places for developers, Stack Overflow, etc. They did not advertise on YouTube because they wanted to avoid being said to be targeting children, right? So the idea was a game that teaches kids how to program, and they didn't advertise it to kids, of course, they advertised it to their programming parents that want their kids to get into the same deal. All right, so that's what COPA is. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. So, as a general rule, we don't have to worry about COPA because kids don't have credit cards. So if you have an e-com site and you're selling something and they can pull out a credit card, it's not a kid, at least not somebody 13, unless it's like Macaulay Culkin back in the day, I don't know. But that's an exception to the rule. So if you're selling something for money, you're pretty much safe from COPA because kids don't have credit cards, all right? But it is an important one because if you're doing something that's not directly related to money, you want to make sure you're not asking kids for information. All right, so CalAPA is basically the same kind of thing. This is California's first version of what we're calling CCPA. It's a Privacy Act. So like most of these privacy acts, they're sort of, as you would say in Pirates of the Caribbean, they're more like guidelines than rules, right? So they all have these rules, but they are missing teeth. And so it's only the most recent rule sets that have teeth. So some of these rules have been around for years, in a couple of cases, a decade or more, but you've never heard of them because they never had teeth. The reason we all hear about GDPR is because their fines are no joke, right? So we don't really care about California's Protection Act because this will be covered by other stuff. The main takeaway here is you want to have a terms and conditions and or a privacy policy page on your site. What that means is when you see a privacy policy page, you can go look at other people's to see what they're doing. It's, unfortunately, it's way too much legalese in most cases. But what a privacy policy page is supposed to be is, hey, here's what we're doing with your data. Here's what we're not doing with your data. And we believe we're using reputable third parties. Here's a list of some of those third parties, okay? So if you are doing a regular site that is using Google Analytics, Mixpanel, any of the nice, big, beautiful analytics companies out there that are doing standard stuff, you are fine. If you're selling weed or CBD or cigarettes or anything that is considered a vice, and or you're using some analytics company that might have an asterisk and be considered shady by anybody, you're not fine, okay? So you have to be very careful, and in most cases, this is just automatic for us, right? In most cases, if you're not selling those sort of vice items, you don't have to worry about somebody paying extra scrutiny to you, okay? And it's not just for CalOPA, it's just for any one of these privacy acts, okay? The main thing here is you have to be somebody doing this for profit. If you're non-for-profit, like the Red Cross or Salvation Army or something, none of this stuff, what's the word I'm looking for, applies to you, right? There are other rules, but most of these privacy protections acts are to protect regular citizens from nefarious business. All right, so HIPAA is the one that's sort of the weird one out of this list, but I figured I'd toss it in as well. So HIPAA is not about commerce, it's about your health records and health information. This is also US federal law, it's been around for a while. And the colonoscopy one gets when you fail this regulation is serious. Do not get in trouble for HIPAA. It's better to get in trouble than embezzling if you did it. Or to have somebody else in your company embezzle, not you personally. All right, so HIPAA has 3 tenets. One is you want to physically protect the data, right? So nobody should be able to walk up, stick a USB in, take out data, or take a stack of, depends on the company. You've seen it probably, where somebody has a stack of forms or PDFs that have been printed out, it's got credit card numbers, or this person has hepatitis Z or whatever on it. Like, you don't want somebody to be able to just yank that stack of paper and walk out the door. So physical protection of data, primarily electronic. Second tenet is on protection of networks. So somebody shouldn't be able to hack into your network, or if it's not secure, just log into your network, get access to file systems, and be able to pull data that way. And then the third one is that the data, if maybe, since hepatitis Z doesn't exist, that shouldn't be something on anybody's paperwork. It should be B or C, right? So the information should be accurate. So it is on the onus is on you as the person collecting the data that you have the correct data. I think it's kind of interesting because the only reason the correct data matters is if somebody steals it. But the goal is you must make sure that your data is accurate and correct. And if it is incorrect and the person whose data it is complains, that you have a proper way of addressing that complaint. Which reminds me, I think I skipped a slide. Yeah, I skipped a slide. So this is sort of the overview for all of these privacy regulations. There's really, depending on who you ask, there are up to like 10 things, but these are the things that are core. So accountability, which is if somebody has access to data, I want to have a throat to choke. Whose fault is it that somebody get access to this? Whose fault is it that everybody now thinks I have hepatitis Z, which I'm just going to now start saying is the zombie virus, all right? If you have my data, or if you're storing certain pieces of data, I should be able to, maybe I can't necessarily say, yes, store that piece of data, but I should know what you're storing by using this service, you're consenting to blah, 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 okay? I can't be like, store this data, not this data necessarily, in the way most applications are written, but I should at least know whether I wanna use you or not if you're storing weird stuff or what I think is weird stuff. Limit collection, so the idea is you should only collect the stuff that you need. This is actually becoming a problem for, you know, giant companies that, you know, let's say 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, any conference you ever went to that's about technology, they would say capture everything you can all the time. You don't know if and when it's going to be useful. It's better to have that. Just take the whole mountain, and hopefully there's some gold in it later when you decide to go looking, right? This is part of the reason why we have these privacy laws, because if you visited the Meetup site today, somebody could capture your browser, your computer, your IP address. The last 5 times you visited, they can figure out, oh, this person only works on 2 computers. They have a cell phone that does blah, blah, blah. They have the Meetup app, or they don't have the Meetup app, right? And Meetup is a very small player. But you have players like Google, you have players like Facebook, who are on literally billions of websites. I don't need a billion websites to be able to make a profile on you. Even the first year or first semester data science student that had 1,000 points of data on you across the sites you visit on the internet can tell you a whole bunch of stuff about yourself, right? Google knows more about you than you do. Facebook knows more about you than you do too, but so do your friends, I guess. The issue here is a lot of people aren't careful with their data on the internet. They don't know necessarily what data they're spreading on the internet. And so one of the reasons they have these privacy laws is before we get to that point, hopefully, where these big guys can start doing very interesting things with your data, we want to force them to start limiting the data. It's kind of interesting because everybody always worries about Big Brother. There's somebody with a tinfoil hat worrying about the NSA and the like collecting all this data, which they got in trouble for some of that. But a lot of the data that the NSA collects is from Google and Facebook. They buy it from them just like everybody else, right? If you've ever heard of InfoUSA lets people know what magazines you subscribe to, right? So I do World Wildlife Federation and Planned Parenthood. So every blue thing that occurs, every liberal thing that occurs in end of the year, I get 300 envelopes for stuff I don't care about, right? But they can do that because they have scraped my data. Somebody has sold my data somewhere, right? So Google and Facebook will sell your data. They sell it to the government. They sell it to other players. Yes, sir.
So, bearing in mind that nobody ever purges data, they just add more servers. There's data archives going back however many decades at this point. Is there issues around safeguarding stuff that's just in archive somewhere?
Nothing that is, so that's a good question. That's something that I think is gonna have to get challenged in court before somebody touches it, right? So if it's on an S3 glacier somewhere, no, you just leave it to die, right? I mean, if it's the tree that fell in the forest and nobody heard it, right? If there's a terabyte of data and nobody looks at it, is it data? I don't know, right? It might change 5 years from now when we have, autonomous software that goes trolling through that data. But right now, since we haven't quite gotten there, maybe we don't care, right?
Yeah.
Eventually, the dollar counts and we say, oh, why are we storing this ton of data nobody's used in 10 years? And we'll toss it, right?
Well, or you get a request under Cal Output to have your data removed.
Right. And so that is an interesting thing right there, and I'll talk about that.
GDPR, that's where that
Yeah,
comes in.
that's where GDPR comes
You're
in.
responsible for storing it if somebody says get rid of it.
Yeah, I'll talk about that a little bit more. So that goes into limit use and retention. People can only store your data for so long. So before these rules, they can store your data forever. And in some cases, they can still store your data forever, depending on when you agree to some of these things, depending on what your relationship is. But the general idea is if you're a regular consumer, not necessarily a business, again, not necessarily a nonprofit entity, there are limits to what they can do with your data. Okay. Accuracy, just like we talked about for HIPAA, to make sure that whatever they're ascribing to you is actually supposed to be ascribed to you, and if it's not correct, you can undo it or make it your necessary change. That's also sort of comes in the safeguards. If you know, unlike the do not fly list or something, you should be able to take yourself off if something is wrong. All right. All right. So we talked about HIPAA already. Let's talk about, I don't know how to say this one, PIPEDA. So this is the Canadian version. Yes, sir.
But do not fly list that's maintained by the federal government. Does the federal government also have to abide by these rules and regulations?
Not by these
Yeah.
rules, but they have their own rules, which they ignore for Homeland Security reasons. But the government used to have rules on how long they kept data on this kind of stuff, but they keep pushing the Patriot Act and similar kind of rules, so that doesn't apply. And that's only to the, you know, if we're being tinfoil hatty, right? That's only to the stuff that we have expressly given permission for. There's lots of stuff we haven't, like the Congress hasn't expressly given permission for. So that, you know, there are only laws about things that somebody cares about. If you don't know about it, or if nobody's interested enough to make it a thing or make it not a thing, you know, like, does somebody have a law right now about preventing private citizens from having space portals like Stargate? No, because nobody, I'm assuming they don't exist. And so until somebody misuses it, somebody's not gonna care enough to write a law about it, right? So there are lots of ways people are using data, especially the government, that
I
are,
think it's
there
a
are no
pretty big
laws around.
assumption that there is no such law yet.
Oh, there are tons of things there are no such laws on. They're all the time, right? Look at the history of America, black people, in Native Americans, women. There are lots of things where just like, there are laws that haven't been written, and more importantly, there are laws that have never been taken off the books. So there are laws, technology keeps progressing. We don't have laws against AI or for curtailing or managing AI. We don't have laws on nanotech, right? Similarly, we don't have laws on big data, at least, especially at the federal level. All right.
Not until Julian Assange gets it.
Well, yeah, possibly. Maybe after he gets it. Okay, so the main thing here for PIPEDA is because, again, this is Canada. A lot of the services they use are just like we use here. They're American, so they're using Google or they're using Facebook or whatever else. So if I'm a Canadian company like Shopify, Shopify has to include in their privacy policy, hey, we get data from this person and we get data from this person. And we use Mixpanel, which is in California, and we use XYZ, which is in the UK, and we use Google, which is everywhere, right? But it's not necessarily just Canada. So when your data goes across the border, this is why Canadians care, and so they have a rule there. Now, all of these rules, they're great to know, they don't matter. And here's why, okay? All of them lack fangs, never had teeth. GDPR changes that. GDPR is the European Union saying, we're tired of Google controlling everything. France wants a new French Google out there, and they're gonna try and, you know, kidney punch Google every shot they got. Germany doesn't, the Germans like the concept of privacy, which we've forgotten about in the US, right? And so they are trying to prevent the bigs, especially the American bigs, from collecting data about everybody all over the world, all right? So GDPR has a lot of the same things we talked about before. The difference is you can get some legitimate fines. I believe it's 10% of revenue, and I mean top line revenue if you get in trouble for these things.
And it's actually worldwide revenue, not just EU-wide revenue.
Yes, of your company's revenue, so like all of your company. But here's where GDPR comes, that's kind of interesting. GDPR is for companies that are targeting customers in the EU. So if you have a site in the US and some percentage of your visitors, some relatively small percentage, less than 50%, let's say. I think most people will say less than 25%. Of your visitors are from the EU, you can operate as normal. Even if it's 50%, you can operate as normal. However, if you start advertising to people in the EU, which if you're using Facebook advertising, it might be doing it for you already. If you start advertising to people in the EU, and again, in your commercial entity, this stuff starts playing in, right? Now, if you're a tiny player, it doesn't matter what they find you because it's not a lot of money, right? But if you're, they have been handing out fines to Google like it's candy, right? And Google's doing the same thing Google's always been doing, but now with these new laws, they have mallets to hit them with, right? And so if you are in good standing with GDPR or something very similar, because all of these protection acts are pretty much the same or very similar. If you're in good standing with one of these, you're in good standing with almost all of them. They have a few tweaks between them, but again, because GDPR is the first big one with teeth, everybody sort of uses that as a standard. And of course, if you're covered by GDPR, or if you're in the right of GDPR, all the other ones I talked about, CalAPA, PAPETA, et cetera, all of that stuff covers you. So just if you treat all your customers the same way, not just your European customers, then you're fine. Okay. Now, for GDPR, there are a couple of things that are different than just saying I have a privacy policy on my site. This is where you've now started seeing those little pop-ups at the bottom of the page that says, oh, we have cookies and we have blah, blah, blah. Click here to give permission, right? And you can ignore the click, but they're still gonna take your data. The difference is when you click OK, you click see more, they have to take you to their privacy policy page. They have to take you to a terms of service page, right? Most of us don't know enough legalese to know how to put those things together. So I'll talk about a couple of options of how to get that. But because everybody has to do this in your industry, in your tranche, in our case, let's say e-com, you can go look for a bigger player, or let's say like 3 bigger players that are in the same area, and they have their terms of service, privacy policy, etc. And that could give you a very good thing to crib and use on your site. Okay, I'll go to that a little bit more later. All right, CCPA. California saw GDPR, they're like, yep, that sounds good. Let's make it our own. So copies like almost everything out of GDPR, and it adds a couple of nice little nuggets to it. The main one, of course, just like the GDPR is about being somebody in the EU, CCPA is about if you're a commercial entity, again, commercial entity, that operates in California. So the question of operates is tricky because you could be like us and we're in Austin, we operate in Austin, right? But if I'm sitting on a Google server somewhere, does that count as operating in California? Because Google is based in California. Chrome is based in Google Chrome, right? Firefox is in California. All of the technology we take for granted to do e-commerce, almost all of those companies, except for Amazon, are in California.
Makes the Amazon Virginia cluster look a lot better than the West Coast.
I know. Right, but that's still a problem because that's Google, Apache, like all of these organizations that have software there, those organizations all operate as commercial entities in California. Right?
Okay, can you claim that as a cloud service, technically you do not know the location of that technology, therefore you are exempted?
Yes, therefore everybody can charge you, right? So that was the claim. That is why, that was the claim before why we didn't collect tax on e-com. People said it's too freaking hard to figure out where am I shipping this to, where am I shipping it from? And somebody said, you know what, every state will tax you. And somebody figured it out, right? So Amazon has figured out, they complained for decades, literally decades, about how impossible this would be. Amazon's got it solved, everybody else can get it solved pretty quickly, right? And as a general rule, it is if you're selling in the same state, you pay tax. If you're selling from one place to another state, the state that you're selling to, if anybody's collecting taxes, they're the ones who are going to collect tax. Okay. However, there's software for that too, which I'll talk about later. So the main point again for California is if you're doing business with people in California, if you're targeting people in California. This one's also a little tricky, because if you're advertising to Americans, but you're not specifying non-California Americans, then you can be tickled with this one, right? And so this is a case where a lot of people can avoid, especially with a small player, a lot of people can avoid getting hit with GDPR. But if you're in America and you sell to Americans, you're probably gonna get hit with CCPA at some point, once you hit that 25 million mark, right? So this is a good problem to have, yes, sir.
And GDPR itself, it doesn't have any sort of revenue requirements like CCPA does, right?
It does, but it's not a hard number, it's a percentage of business,
Right.
percentage of consumers.
So I mean, like, if you make like $100 and like, you
But you
advertise to
sold
me,
50 of
like,
it to somebody in
55.
the UK, or not the UK now,
EU.
in France.
France.
The UK is gonna be out of it, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you sold it to somebody in France and you mess up their data, they will fine you for an extra $10,
Right.
and you're probably out of business, right? All right, so we're gonna switch tracks and go from privacy to security. And this is still a little bit about privacy, but instead of it being stuff that might be embarrassing or not, let people sort of start copying your life, this is steal money, all right? I don't remember what PCI stands for. Crap. I will have to look it up in a second. But there's an organization, it is basically the big credit cards, including Diners Club, who nobody knows, and JCB. Those guys all got together, and we said, this whole internet thing is a pain in the keister. How do we keep our stuff safe? How do we minimize fraud, et cetera, et cetera?
Payment card industry.
Thank you, payment card industry. If you're a developer, there's a thing called OWASP, O-W-A-S-P, which is a set of guidelines for you as a developer for here are the things to think about so you don't get in trouble with the payment card industry. So when you're operating as a business, yes, sir.
On the meetup for OWASP, it's actually tomorrow.
Oh, where is it here?
It's at noon at National Instruments. like
Okay,
one of
which
the
is
main
on
areas.
MOPAC?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's at 11:30 a.m.
Okay, so OWASP is a security standard, yeah. And so as a general, if you're in the banking industry, if you're in insurance, when I was in insurance, the security level is 1 or 2 generations beyond what is current in e-com, right? And so, bank standards are at AES 1024 in some cases now, which is it's an encryption algorithm. The bigger the number is, the harder it is to crack, right? And so, so there are a set of standards for programmers on how to handle this stuff. But PCI, just like HIPAA, is not purely about just keeping people's data private. It's also about sort of the tubes, if you will, the network, keeping the network secure, and what are the processes that you're doing as you're operating your business that keeps this data secure, all right? So just like you don't want that stacks of hepatitis Z documentation, if you're running let's say Avon or something like that, where people send in paper things with their credit card numbers on it. I know you guys, I think everybody here is old enough to remember that, right? So I've worked at a couple of places not that long ago where I've walked into an office and there's literally a stack from the floor to this high, multiple stacks of paper with credit cards on it, right? And I could just do this, yank, and just have left with 200 credit cards. Now, I'm not sure how much money, it's not like these people were buying Mercedes or anything, they're buying small things. But still, I might have made a lucrative business just siphoning $20 a month off each of these people. Now, that is physical paper, right? There's also digital stuff, a lot of the same stuff, same kind of technology processes that you need to worry about around HIPAA apply for PCI, right? The big one, and if you've been here at All Ever before, you've heard me talk about it, is you don't store credit cards on your server. You don't it doesn't pass through your server if you can avoid it. And I'm sorry?
One of those nice little
That's right.
Had to get the PCI.
Right, and the reason is you don't have the skill, manpower, whatever else you want to call it, to properly secure your server and that data from everybody. I think I'm pretty sharp, but if there were two other people exactly as smart as me, or even dumber than me, and as sharp as I think I was, if they came after me specifically, because they hated my guts specifically, they would find a way to get to my data, right? It is better to have somebody else do that fight for you. And so one of the biggest things if you're running an e-com site is don't store your credit card on your server, which is why we have services like PayPal and Stripe and all these guys. We push that data request to them. Nowadays, if you look at somebody like Stripe or Braintree or PayPal, they do a lot of that stuff now, all the credit card processing in JavaScript. So it doesn't even it doesn't run through the PHP or the Ruby on Rails or Java on your server. It is entirely between your web browser and Stripe or whoever else's servers, right? So there are 4 levels of PCI compliance.
Was that to deal with the pop-up e-com?
That's why, yes, that's why they got shut down last year. Yeah, the Stripe modem.
Yeah.
So there are 4 levels. Almost everybody falls under, level 3 or level 4. I've been lucky enough, or unlucky enough, I've been in e-com providers of all levels, right? So most of us are going to be doing if you're doing 20,000 transactions a year, that's pretty decent. That's just self-reporting. So what happens is there's a survey that you fill that says how many transactions you do, what is your average transaction, what's the average order amount in the transaction, what's your normal transaction value, what is your rate of fraud, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things come together and they help you figure out your level. So most of us are going to be in level 4, some of us are going to be in level 3, and as you can sort of see the rules on what the levels are. And these are transactions a year, if I remember correctly, I think it's a year. If you have a data breach, you automatically progress straight to level 1 for the full colonoscopy. And it doesn't happen all the time, but if you're getting a data audit, especially if you had a data breach, they go out of their way to make sure you don't have another one. So the kind of things that happen in that is somebody tries to do penetration testing on your physical wire network in your building. Somebody tries it on your Wi-Fi. Somebody tries it on your remote employees. Somebody leaves USB sticks just lying around, right? Somebody calls in and says, my favorite, hey, I'm from IT, we're resetting your password, right? What is your one right now? And I know that sounds like it's kind of stupid, but there are 6 companies I have worked for in Austin that if I called today to somebody that's never met me, I can get access, okay? And I'm not doing anything special. I haven't hacked into anything. I literally call somebody. I know the name of the right thing to ask for, and they will give it to me because I'm from IT, right? The people that are invisible in the company are custodians and janitors and
Programmers.
Well, in a different way. Yeah, social engineering.
Social engineering,
Yeah.
and there's like a lot of books about it, and
Right.
usually like that's usually how you actually hack like big companies.
Right, so the single biggest point of failure for almost every enterprise, every technology problem is humans,
People factor.
right? So everybody ignores your janitor, your cafeteria person, fine. Those people can walk around and plug USB sticks in because nobody pays attention to them. Everybody gives room to your IT people. If I walked in tomorrow with a freaking, not even a pocket protector, just a lanyard on my neck tomorrow, and I walked in here and I said, I'm here to fix service for Josh, right? Josh Bear, who was one of the people that runs this place. Now, he can fix his own damn computers, but they might let me go. And I'm gonna go sit at his computer for 10 minutes while he's away somewhere and get physical access to his machine, right? So this is why companies, your IT team always defaults to no. They always tell you to lock your computer, have a password, blah, 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 blah. Because the problem is not the computer, the problem is the person in the chair, right? You are the single biggest security hole any company has. Just your, I mean, not any one of you specifically, but all of us collectively, us, we are the enemy, right?
Which is the reason the first thing AI is gonna do is eliminate people.
Is what, eliminate people?
Yeah.
No, that's how we're never gonna be able to hack it. All right, so a couple more things. Let's talk about taxes. Taxes is one of those things that people think is terribly difficult, and in some cases it is, especially when you're dealing with controlled stuff, right? So on a state-to-state basis, because again, we're in a federation of states, every state gets to make its own rules about what gets taxed and how. So some things, so like in Michigan, Sprite, stuff like that is considered food, so it's not taxed. In other states, it's considered not food, and so it gets taxed, right? In California, if I get a vaping thing, cigarette thing, that is considered a controlled product, and there's a vice tax on it, right? Which is the same just about anywhere else, right? However, the USB cord I connect to that vaping thing in Texas and Michigan is just a USB cord. The act of connecting it to the vaping thing, or the fact that I'm thinking about doing it, becomes paraphernalia in California, and so this USB cord, which is a regular ass USB cord, now gets the vice tax because I'm buying it at the same time as I'm buying the vape thing, okay? So, on a state-by-state basis, especially when you're dealing with controlled products, you have to start worrying about what things get taxed and what things don't get taxed. Most people are not gonna keep track of that. So that is one of the big reasons, unless you know what you're doing, you do not play in the avenues of CBD, marijuana for the states where it's legal, and cigarettes, especially, well, you can't play in cigarettes, that you need literally millions of dollars for that. But for the other ones, you wanna be careful, make sure you know your laws, and if you're gonna play there, play in your state. Don't go outside unless you got mad lawyers. Right.
In California, there's a vice tax on plastic straws.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually. So, there are 42,100 zip codes that are actually used out of our 100,000 zip codes, right, in the US. There are north of 100,000 municipalities. Each one of them could, in theory, come up with their own set of rules on taxing soda, cigarettes, meat, straws. Yes, sir.
I think each zip code is actually can belong to multiple municipalities as well, right?
Right, some of them do. Some of them belong to multiple municipalities, especially in smaller parts of the
There could be
country.
overlay districts and all
Yeah.
this other stuff like that.
But we also have places like here in Austin, there are several municipalities that are only several zip codes that only belong to one municipality. Well, the point is there are thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of municipalities, and in theory, each one of them can make up their own laws, right? So I used to live in Detroit. If you lived in Detroit and you worked in Detroit, there's a normal tax you got for living in Detroit, but then you got like a 1% tax on your income. If you worked in Detroit and you lived outside of Detroit, they charge you 2%, right? So, because of course, they gotta say the upkeep for all the highways. I don't know where that money went, but based on where you lived and where you worked, you got taxed differently, right? So they handle that in the HR department, but for us running e-com, right, based on who we're shipping to and their rules, it might be taxed differently. Now, most states, at least up till now, are still allowing sort of earnest effort. And the idea of earnest effort is, if I'm not doing something that's controlled, I can sell to any standard state, from any standard state, and they will let me go with the sort of default rules, which is I collect tax and I pay it to the state where that person, where the product got shipped to.
What if you're not actually shipping anything, if it's a service instead?
If it's a service, if anybody's gonna collect taxes, the state you're in. And so those are, and it depends on the kind of service, right? So in theory, you could have that as a service and never report it, but when your revenues get big enough, somebody's going to notice and come smack you. Yes, sir.
So I think it depends on the state, like some states actually do tax digital services. So actually had to pay tax on like my iTunes purchases.
Yep.
But then I changed it to California, and there's no tax on digital purchase in California, so I no longer had to pay that.
Right, and so again, it's on a state-by-state basis. So the EU operates sort of like, it will eventually become the United States of Europe, I think. The EU operates as one sort of, let's say, technical entity for taxing purposes. I'm gonna give you a 30-second background on VAT. VAT means value-added tax, all right? And here's how it works. I have this phone case that I bought, we got here from China pre-coronavirus for $1, right? I'm going to now sell it for $3, okay? So what I'm going to charge is $3 plus the tax on that $3 minus $1. So I did something, hopefully, that added value between that $1 and the $3. So my tax is on 3 minus 1 plus what, depending on I don't know what the number is right now. It's like 16% or something. So instead of charging $3, I would charge $3.32 because that's 16% of $2. Does that make sense?
And every person that touches it gets.
Right, so this is a layer cake, right? So let's say I got this from China, got to me, so $1, I'm gonna sell it for $3. And all I'm doing to it is I'm adding a fancy logo to it, okay? I then sell it to somebody else who buys it from me at that price, and they paint it a different color. They charge something else too. Each one of us is paying some amount of tax as part of that stack. So if you're the 4th person or 5th person, the final person that buys it, you're buying it at this price, which is my delta plus tax, and the next guy's delta plus tax, and the next guy's delta plus tax. And that is what VAT is, value-added tax. Yes, sir?
I think it actually works differently. I think like it's always a fixed number depending on the state. So like in Germany it's like 19%, and like in France it's like 60% or whatever.
Right, so the percentage is static, but
Right.
it's based on the delta between your top line costs and your
Right, so
top
I
line.
think as a business, you basically get a deduction, you get the refund, if you purchase something and you pay VAT, you get a refund of that, I think. And you still, when you sell it, you still sell it, with
At
a
the full
100%
price.
bid.
Right, so, but if you're a consumer, you're eating all of that, right? So when we're selling to consumers, we're giving them the full price, including the VAT. Rules are different if it's a business, just like we have, retailers. Retailers have tax IDs, and so you have a different price that you're paying, basically tax-free, at least in the States, versus a regular consumer. All right,
So, on the question to Paul,
yeah, keep going.
so with remote workers, particularly now with California's SB 459, and having to so what's the deal with like employee tax and?
So that is a good question. Right now, that is mostly solved at HR. So if you are a remote worker that has a regular job, right? So I work for XYZ Corp. They don't care where I live. XYZ Corp either decides that I live enough in location 1 or location 2, and then they handle the taxes that way. So the company I work for, we are all remote, all over the country. They pay taxes in like 14 states, right? Which is where the teams are. If I'm a freelancer, nobody cares about my tax anyway. I have to worry about the tax from a federal perspective, and to stay in good, I probably need to stay in good graces with my state. If I'm in Texas, I don't have to worry about state taxes, but we do have to worry about federal taxes. But that is something, as the percentage of people that are working remotely, full-time remotely, increases, I think that's gonna get interesting. Right now, most people work remotely like I used to work remotely, but I still worked in Austin. Like my office was in Austin, I just didn't go in, right? So, but like my last, 3 of my last 4 jobs, never seen the office, never been there. I can recognize voices, but I don't know half these mofos if you show them to me their face, right? That is truly remote, right? And half my team that I work with was in the middle of the night, right? So, you know, in the Philippines or Belarus or whatever. But the guys in the States, no idea where they come from, no idea where they're going, no idea what time of the day they wake up. Just be on the call at this time and have your work done at this time. And really, those are the only things we care about, at least for a tech company. And that might be different if you're a lawyer, if you're in customer service, if you're a counselor, that kind of thing. But, you know, as the percentage of people that are working truly remote increases, that's going to change. You know, there's a guy on my team that went to Vietnam for a month. Only 2 people noticed, and that's because he was offline for like 2 days. And I'm like, "Where is he? Where is he?" I'm like, "They have a monsoon or something. Like that thing on TV, he's in it. That's why he's not online right now." But nobody noticed because, you know, he's been remote for a year plus. And as long as he does his job, who cares, right? All right, so if you care about taxes, and since we're not in the EU, we don't have it quite as nice. If you care about taxes, in the WooCommerce world, there's really only one real player, and it's TaxJar. If you're in other places, just in case you write your own software, or you look at Shopify, or look at BigCommerce, the other big places, if you got money, Vertex is the way to go. Vertex has a lot of fancy specialization, and you can, so if you're in Magento, Hybris, ATG, Demandware, you can use Vertex, but it is not cheap. Avalara is slightly cheaper, but it's still not cheap. And so Avalara works with Magento, it works with Shopify, Volusion. If you're writing custom code, of Avalara, I think is the best of the bunch. Because the way it works, again, you gotta look at hundreds of thousands of municipalities and figure out tax in each one of those things, each one of those places. So if I have this phone case, let's say it's not a phone case, let's say it's a candy bar, but it's a candy bar made of crickets and chocolate. So it's not just candy, it's also food because it has nutritional value, right? In one state, it's got chocolate in it, it's candy, tax it, right? In another state, it's a health bar, don't tax it, right? Or in the town next door, it's a health bar, don't tax it, right? That's something you're gonna go blind trying to figure out. Avalara has people, just like Vertex, they have people that spend all their time figuring this stuff out. And tax information changed on a municipality basis on a monthly basis. Now, almost no municipalities change on a monthly basis, but I try to do this myself once for a company I worked at. At least a municipality changes every month, and at least it's a municipality we cared about changed on a monthly basis, right? And so it'd be like, oh, all of a sudden, 32-ounce containers of liquid are now taxed differently. All of a sudden, paper straws are taxed differently because they've been in some slightly different, I don't know, some different category. So for all kinds of products that you sell on the internet, and most of us don't care about this right now because we're very general. For all kinds of products that you sell on the internet, they're very specific, like, what's the name? From a import control standpoint. So if you were at customs, everything has a designation. So this would be a like plastic phone case protective or plastic case protective versus plastic case gel. Those might be 2 different price points because one is hard plastic, which we don't want, and the other one is rubber, which we do want or something. Or we're trying to help out Myanmar, who has a booming rubber industry or something, right? So this is stuff that, you know, whenever we talk about trade deals, there's a whole bunch of lawyers, a whole bunch of economists that figure out what these things are, okay? So that's what happens when it's coming into the country. When it's now on a municipality level, they also keep track of that, but most of us have no freaking clue, so we don't annotate these things properly, right? So when you're working with a company like a Avalara, TaxJar, or Vertex, you say, I sell phone cases, and they will know it is type blah, 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 meaning that thing is taxed, or that thing is not taxed in your area. If you don't tell them all the different stuff you sell, you might end up with one thing that's like a vice, because, you know, They don't want metal, what'd you call those? They don't want metal pipes in Amish land. They only want wooden pipes. And so they do triple fine you, right? And you don't know, and now you owe whatever the thing in central Pennsylvania is, you owe them $1 million because you broke the law, right? So that is why it's important if you're doing a lot of different kind of products, you really are selling all over the place, anything that's kind of controlled at all, to consider using one of these tax services. Tax jars are the cheapest of the sets. They're also the simplest. They also exist for WooCommerce. We should so write that down. We should look at Avalara for WooCommerce. Nobody has written one. All right, so let me go over the last couple of things here before everybody mentally checks out on me. So let's talk about the ADA. It's Americans with Disability Act. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Americans with Disability Act has been around for a long time, and is the reason why we get things like ramps, and we get door opening at certain heights. So the reason why we have that strip down here to open the door when you push it is not for tall people, it's for people in wheelchairs, right? It's the same reason why there's certain heights you can have a sink in the toilet, why we have the bar in the toilet next to the toilet seat. Those are the reasons that those things exist, to make the physical world more conducive for people who have physical disabilities in getting around. Well, ADA also applies to the online world, but until recently, nobody cared, right? People are gonna care now because there was a crazy ass case where somebody sued Domino's, because Domino's has a pizza builder. It sounds like it's preposterous, but it was one of the, like, I actually watched some of this case. This is as horribly C-SPAN as possible, but it's fantastic. So they sued Domino's because Domino's has this make your topping builder, right? So you can say, I want this part to be pepperoni, I want this part to be anchovies, I hate you, Steve, or whatever. I'm gonna give him anchovies. I'm gonna add, I don't know, pineapple or Canadian bacon, which is not really bacon. You're gonna put Canadian bacon and pepperoni, seems like an overdose, on one side, and anchovies because we hate Steve. So we order that, right? And we send it out, and that is the perfect pizza. If I am blind, if I don't have fine motor control, so I can't use the mouse properly, especially, so the person that sues says, hey, I'm blind, this thing doesn't work in my browser, right? And Domino's is not us. Domino's is a big freaking company, right? So Domino's, big freaking company, should be able to, again, they do commerce, they're a large public company, they should be able to accommodate me as somebody with non-standard needs, right? Because I have a disability of some kind, right? And Domino's said, no, this is special code. We got some fancy JavaScript to make this thing work. That is not for you. They can just call the number. And they said, nope. And they took it to court, and Domino's lost. And you will not believe how many people I talked to on the internet for about a 2-week standpoint, all of us that write really fancy JavaScript or really fancy web application. Can you believe this junk just happened? I can't believe it, man. I gotta go back and check all my stuff. I hope we don't get sued. Here's what's happening, especially in California. If I'm a good lawyer or a sleazy lawyer, depending on how you feel about it, and I wanna make some money or make some change, I'm gonna sue the pants off everybody, right?
Florida
So,
too.
Florida, New York.
Actually, New York, 83% of the 177% increase in lawsuits
Is in New York.
was from 15 companies in New York.
Right, because it's printing money, right? I'm gonna sue, I still make my money either way. If I don't make my money, I force you to make a change as a business, right? So one of the things that's gonna happen, I don't know if it's this year, maybe it's next year, is there's gonna be a whole ADA racket of like, it would be a shame
It's already starting.
if something happened to your website, or, so people, a lot of people have been thinking about designing websites only on pure aesthetics, right? I'm sure you've seen a website where you're like, wow, that designer had a lot of fun, but I can't find the frickin' login button, right? So imagine if now that designer that barely cares about seeing people, cares not at all for blind people, right? How much that company is gonna get sued, right? And the teeth on the suit is there's a certain amount of time you have to fix the problem or you start paying significant fines, right? So, if you are in New York and you're an entity that's a public entity that belongs to the state of New York or the city of New York, your site must be ADA compliant. One of the big reasons people were pitching fits about Gutenberg is that for some implementation of Gutenberg, it was not quite ADA compliant. So there's been a whole bunch of work to make sure that some of this stuff is ADA compliant. If you're in a university anywhere in the country, a public university in the country, you have to be ADA compliant. There are,
Federal
I don't remember.
dollars as well, it's not
I'm
just
sorry?
public universities.
Right,
If you have a sizable amount of federal dollars.
right, if you take money
You
from
have to be
Uncle Sam, so there are, I don't remember, 3,300, 3,300 something, public schools, in public universities in the US. All of those guys need to be ADA compliant. So,
And
you
have
know,
3 levels of compliance.
I'm sorry?
You have 3 levels of compliance too.
Yes, but right now, very few
Nobody's
corporations, right, very few corporations are truly compliant. So the benefit of WordPress is WordPress, if you're doing reasonable stuff with the standard themes like storefront has compliance. If you saw the big change in 5.2 versus 5.3 in the back end of WordPress, which now has that sort of blue lines around it, it makes things easier for people that need high contrast screens to be able to see. So let's say you can see, but you can't see too well, or you can see in a very limited color range. It makes it easier for your machine to compensate for you. So WordPress does that fairly well, but the place where you're gonna fall over is more likely going to be in your fancy theme than the back end of WordPress, right? So that's something to be keeping track of. And so if you're using other systems, so like Shopify is working on it, BigCommerce working on Evolution, Magento's working on it, all these guys are working on making their systems more compliant. But you know, I'll tell you this, if I was 5 years out of school, I would be suing everybody, right? I would just take the same form, change the .com on the top, and as long as like, you know, if I had a cousin or a friend, or if it was me that had the disability, I would just like run a script and send it out to everybody.
Don't give the billboard lawyers ideas.
They don't watch this, but that's what I would do. So that is not here now, but it is coming. So if you're running an e-com site, they're not gonna care about you because you're small fries, but
No, they're starting at the top.
right, they're gonna work their way down for sure,
And they're
because that's where all
already
the money is. But you might as well, you know, it doesn't take that much work to be compliant, and you might get business you didn't know, you know, was interesting. For example, there are people that like weighted blankets, right? So weighted blankets used to be a thing only for like, I think people on the Asperger spectrum or something. But regular people like weighted blankets, right? If you have, there's some disease of like your nerves get all weird, it gets painful. It's like a degenerative disease. It's not lupus, but something like it. Having a weighted blanket also helps you sleep better for whatever reason, right? And so some of these people have lost fine motor control, and so they talk to their computers, right? So for you to be able to talk to your computer, your browser has to know what's going on. If it's too fancy a website design, that person can't buy your product. You never know if your product is gonna blow up in a specific niche. I'll tell you this, was it 2 years ago that, when we're talking about specific niches, 2 years ago, Black Panther came out, right? I had a friend in Houston that makes these shirts that nobody was buying, okay? These shirts, they're like tunics, they're like, they're West African cut tunics. And he convinced me to buy one, my friend bought one, a couple of us bought one, because he really worked hard at this thing. But like, you know, it's Houston, everybody already has these shirts, or something like it. Or we just have traditional, like I'm Nigerian, I already have traditional Nigerian garb. I'm not gonna wear jeans and a not quite proper tunic because it's stylish. That's not me, maybe in Atlanta. Black Panther came out, this dude sold like gangbusters, right? He had to ship, like we had to send stuff to Nigeria and be like, I need everybody in this village start making shirts. I don't know how to make it, start making shirts, right? And for like 2 months until April, so, you know, February, March, he sold out of every design, every pattern, every blah, 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 right? The African American community was not who he was targeting when he made these tunic shirts, right? But all of a sudden it blew up. Same thing could happen for you if you're doing weighted blankets, or if you're doing, I don't know, some weird slime thing that is good tactile, or you're doing something that could be used for Braille, right? So you never know where your market comes from. It can surprise you, so you might as well spend a little extra energy, a little 5% more energy, and make yourself available to take in that money. Everybody's money is green. Take it. All right. So here's the notes for what tools, for all the stuff I've talked about. It sounds interesting. It sounds scary. Most of it is not that scary. If you want to handle GDPR, COPPA, most of these guys, you only need to use a couple of plugins. There's a cookie notice plugin in the repository. There's a GDPR specific one. There's a CCPA specific one. There's also a blanket one that just sort of has all the things in it. And there's a bunch of check boxes on and off. As a default, if you're not doing anything fancy, just leave the defaults on, okay? And install it. What you're gonna need with that is you're gonna need, and WordPress already does this by default now. When you create a new site, it creates a privacy policy page, and I think it creates a terms of service or terms and conditions page. So you're gonna wanna put something on those pages. The easiest thing is to find somebody that does the same thing you do, better yet, find 3 people that do the same thing you do, read what they did, and write your own version by plagiarizing and compressing them into one. Okay. If you don't wanna do that, because there's a lot of time, you can pay somebody to do it. So there are lawyers that do this all the time. There's a guy who is at every single WordCamp. I've seen him 6 times in the last year. And it's a company called Termageddon. You pay $10 a month, and for $10 a month across, I don't remember how many websites at one time, he will give you tell them a bunch of stuff. There's some check boxes, some questions they ask, and they will push data to your site to keep your terms and services correct, your privacy policy correct. There's something else. Your data policy, your third-party data policy also correct. So they will keep track of that and they will update it as laws change. So if tomorrow Texas comes up with the TIPA, Texas something Privacy Policy Act, right? A week later, these guys will have an updated thing that will also take care of whatever the constraints are in TIPA versus COPPA or whatever else. So Termageddon is a nice one, and I like the guys that are behind it, so that's my little plug for them. TaxJar, I already talked about that. TaxJar is tax processing. It's automated tax processing. The thing that they don't do, which some of the bigger guys do, is the bigger guys will automatically submit your tax paperwork for you, like on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on the state you are in. TaxJar, at least as of now, I don't think does that. So, but they are very good if you have fancy taxes to worry about, and they don't cost that much. Actually, the basic taxes is free, right? Okay, so then this next one is excessive. It should be excessive B, not accessible. I'm sorry. No L in that, excessiveb.com. And what they are is a site, they're relatively new, they're using some kind of interesting AI, I haven't gone through it completely, that makes their a site that has it set up on it compliant, more ADA compliant. So they run, from what I saw from a technical basis, they run automated tests for if I'm blind, if I'm this, if I'm that, and they now come up with these sort of areas that you need to make tweaks. And in some cases, they will actually implement some of these tweaks for you depending on the plugin you have installed. They have an API which is fancier than what's available for WordPress, but there's somebody to keep an eye on that might be interested, and they might be available as plugins to Shopify and other places as well. All right, and if you care about accessibility at all, there is an accessibility meetup here in Austin that's been going strong for quite a long time. They also come to, we occasionally confab with them for WordPress things, because WordPress cares about accessibility.
Because I used to go to them and I haven't gotten anything from them in a while.
I haven't seen anything in the last couple of months, but I knew they were doing stuff this time
I don't think it's
last
still
year.
running anymore.
It's been more than a couple months.
Oh no. So maybe they're not alive. Okay, I'll send an email.
It used to be really active, but I don't think it's active.
I mean, I know a lot of the people in there and know who to talk to if I need to, but.
So I'll send an email and I'll find out if it's still a thing.
There's also nobility.org,
Right.
and actually, Christopher Schmidt, who a lot of people know, is now working with them.
Okay, good to know. Thank you. All right, I think that's it. So, any questions, comments? Snyder Marks. I know, he used to be a good-looking guy. 12 years later, 10 years later. Is it 10 years? No, this has not been 10 years. Maybe 8 years or something like that. Yeah.
10 years later, you sound 20 years younger.
I know. I'm ready to go back to the old me, or the old sounding me. Any questions? Yes.
So if you have a product that's illegal in some states,
Mm-hmm.
what exactly do you need to put on your website? Do you need to have, like, it coded so that it won't be able to ship to those states? Or do you need someone just to check a box saying we don't live in those states?
You definitely want it to not ship to those states.
Okay.
So, in fact, you really don't want to ship it. If it's illegal so if it's only illegal in the states but not illegal federally or criminalized federally, you're probably fine. But if it's illegal federally, you do not want to ship it because you will get yourself in trouble. You do not want to ship it over state lines, right? Because what happens is the federal government doesn't care until one day when they do. Yes, sir.
Wait, so can you ship it within the state? Because like the USPS is a federal government thing, isn't it?
So you can ship it in the state, but I'll tell you how, right? So there are services, so for example, alcohol is something you need special licenses to ship state to state, right? There's a company, I don't know if they're still here, called Drizzly. They went around that by finding liquor stores, and liquor stores plus Postmates equals Drizzly, okay? I wanna get some, I wanna get a Patron, and I want some Grey Goose today or tomorrow. I'm not getting it shipped from New York, from Amazon or whatever. It's being shipped from some corner store right over here. Somebody rolls up there, buys the stuff, and they add $20 for the delivery, right?
So it's
So
like
that's-
the FTD of.
Yes,
yeah.
and booze. And
Yeah.
that's how weed works. That's exactly how Weed Maps works. Depending on where you are in the country, if you're in California, Colorado, Alaska, now Michigan, I'm gonna look into that.
What if you want like certain strains or whatever that are only available like in certain places?
Then you don't talk about it. It's like Fight Club, right? Then you call somebody, or better yet, physically meet next to a waterfall or something. I don't know what the proper things against surveillance is nowadays. But, you say, oh, this is for the mint or whatever.
This is
right?
why the dark web was invented.
Right. So so again, as regular citizens, we can all do these things, and you can flout the law as much as you want. Problem is, one day the piper might come demanding to be paid, and if you are not ready, that will hurt. So I worked at a place here in Austin. We're selling supplements, and CBD was not legal yet. And he wanted to sell CBD. And I was like, I'm not doing that, because if we get in trouble, you might get in trouble, but I'm the guy that runs the website. I'm for sure in trouble, right? So it's like I'm bowing out. Somebody like Weed Maps, they were only in California, but they had to set up work in California. They had to set up work in Colorado. They had to go state by state and build up their infrastructure. They couldn't just do DHL or FedEx or whatever.
Yeah.
Now, 5 years from now, that might be possible. CBD is now, thanks to Mitch McConnell, something that is, I don't know, I believe I'm saying that, but it's now one of those things that is now legal in the US, so you can ship it. Again, on a state by state basis, because it's a controlled substance. Every state has their rules on how you can ship it. You might have to have special insurance. You might need to verify the person's age. Like if you're selling cigarettes in Alabama is different than Texas, is different than California, right? So you can't just sell cigarettes over state lines. Every state has its own special cases. So especially if your thing is illegal somewhere, it is better to drop it to the state, get it however you want, to the places where it is legal, and figure out intrastate how to move it. Other questions? Anybody? All right. I'm gonna do a little quick show and tell, completely unrelated to all the stuff I've been talking about. One of the things I realized, I have a sort of a bully pulpit because I get to be up here talking, or sometimes somebody else gets to talk, but it's usually me because I like to talk. I figure I'm gonna just shamefully plug some of my own stuff. Mostly I need beta testers, guinea pigs for some of the stuff I'm working on. I have a big, hairy, audacious goal this year of releasing one legit piece of software a month. I'm not sure if I'm gonna make it, but this is the first one. A lot of it was written last year, it just needs to be cleaned up and not suck, I guess. So I'm gonna show you this one right now. This is called Simple Kanban. It's coming very soon. All right, so this is a normal WordPress page that is as virgin as it comes, right?
How long did it take you to make that website?
I didn't even make it. I called somebody on my way here and I was like, hey, make this page. I'm assuming a half a second?
5 minutes.
Maybe five. If it took him 5 minutes, I'm actually disappointed. Like, I don't know what happened. We need to get your game back up. That's right. It said less than 5 minutes, man. This is all standard settings. All right. So what I'm going to show you here is a new plugin me and my crew made. And this is something that Nick and Sandy have been playing with for a while. So I like Trello as much as the next guy, and by I like Trello by as much as the next guy. I have like 900 Trello boards. Okay. However, I want to be able to do stuff like somebody asks me a question on the internet, somebody does a contact form or something. I want to manage all of that stuff in my own Trello with my own people and do fancier stuff with it in the future, right? So it's not all the way to the fancier stuff yet, but it has like baseline Trello style functionality. So I'm going to go and show you a couple things that it has, and I can talk about what it will be doing in the future. But so let me just talk about it real quick. So Trello is a Kanban board. Kanban is a Japanese term from somebody, can't remember the guy's name, in Japan who invented it. Was it Toyota? From Toyota Company?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
You've seen it, if you've seen Trello, if you've seen any kind of system where somebody puts post-its on a board, that's Kanban, right? So what I have is I have a special route here, /Kanban, that will be the Kanban board. I have some default statuses. So this is as super default as it can get. So let's go to the board. And so here's the board. And again, if you use Trello, you understand how all this stuff works, right? And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, oh, design the login page. I am not going to do this anymore. So I decide I'm not going to do it. And I'm going to assign it to Nick. And I'm setting the priority to highest.
Nick, right now, do not do this.
Right, so
That's what he's saying, right now.
So-
Right, and do not do this. Yeah.
do not do, don't do WordPress. Right, so I can create my own tags and stuff like that. And I hit submit. Okay, so it's back here now. Assigned to Nick, we don't have Nick's pretty face. So I'm gonna switch it back to me just so you can see that it's assigned to me again, or I'm gonna assign it to Toyin, sorry. All right, so it's got a little icon to show me what the rating is, if it's high, low, etc. That's what this guy is. If you use Jira, so it gives you a little bit more than what Trello has, but less than Jira, a lot less than Jira. It tells you if there are notes, attachments, etc., who's assigned to, etc., etc. So that's what it is. You can import and export this data from one site to another. There are a couple of things I'm coming out with hopefully soon in the future roadmap, like, well, I'm in this industry, I care about making music, so the columns that you have might have different names. But these are pretty standard, right, to do in progress, review, and done. All right, so now let's add a little something here. Let's make it a little nicer. So there's also like the pro thing on top of this. Activate. All right, so the pro thing, now once that is turned on, it has a couple of extra things. Instead of it being one board that you have, you can now create multiple boards. And so I'm gonna create a second board. This is pizza making. And I'm gonna create a third board, pizza eating. If I can type. And save changes, and it's just made me two additional boards. Okay. Where's the thing I want to do? Oh, right. So, in the pizza making, I'm gonna change the steps. I'm gonna say, what's the thing? Dough.
Dough.
Make dough.
Dough.
Make dough. Twirl dough. Sauce. Toppings. Bake. Serve. No, it's in-house. Only in-house. So, I've now made this board. I'm gonna go look for it. I'm gonna go to that specific board, and you see make dough, twirl dough, sauce, toppings, blah, blah, blah. Actually, let me go back to it real quick. So here's the thing that makes this one a little nicer, I think. We now get colors, and we get types of products, and we also now get due dates. So this is sort of like the pro thing. So you can now say, hey, show me all the stuff that's late. Show me all the stuff that's assigned to me, et cetera, et cetera. We still have the stuff from before priority, and now you also can attach attachments. This all happens inside WordPress still. And where's my color thing? I can't remember where I put that.
Under types.
Thank you. All right, so task, manual, skilled, supervisory. So each one of these can now get its own fancy color. There we go. That's what I want. Go purple, go yellow. Let's go blue. And we're gonna go green.
It's a full 80s rainbow.
That's right. All right, I'm gonna save this. All right, so now let's go back to that sucker. And now, when I'm gonna make a thingy, I can now pick something. So I'm gonna say pizza for Toyin. And I'm gonna say it requires a manual task and it's assigned to Nick. Goes into do, low priority, and I create it. And so you see here, if I now say pizza for Pat, this will require some skill. Before it goes to Toyin, and it's high priority. And so I submit that. Oh, I just reset it, sorry. I need to create a new one. There we go. Pizza for Toyin. So, as you can see, there are probably a couple of things I still need to tweak here, but I need guinea pigs. So if you're interested at all in this, let me know, send an email or email Sandy or something. Yes, sir?
Did you make a bunch of custom tables in the database for this, or?
One or two, I think. I can't remember if it's two or one. I think it's just one.
Just one table, yeah.
Yeah, it's just one table.
Is it
And
all-
the table
is it
just
all powered by
holds.
WordPress?
Yeah, this is WordPress. So this is WordPress, still WordPress. And so this is one. And if you want to look at the other boards, the original board we had is still there, right? And this third board that has absolutely nothing in it is empty with the defaults, right? So you can create multiple boards, and this is the kind of thing that might be nice if you have a sort of a content calendar, multiple writers or something, writing a blog. You can create topics and assign them to people. The kind of stuff that'll be coming hopefully shortly will be like a calendar, so you can see when things that are assigned are due. What else? Being able to export some of this stuff in spreadsheets, and being able to hook into Contact Form 7 or Gravity Forms or Ninja Forms, so somebody fills out the form, when they hit go, whatever that text is goes into a newly created ticket or a Kanban ticket in your board. All right? That's it. So if anybody's interested, let me know. And I think we're done for today.
And because you can put every board in its own page, so if you've got clients you want to share it with, then you can just do password access a page, and then clients can access their own Kanban and see where the project's at.
So Nick and Sandy use it a lot more than I do. I only have one board that I use. But so the stuff that I want is not, I haven't had time to finish it yet. But if you're interested, let me know. Thank you.
The right tool for the right job.